Picture this. It's Boston, late 1800s. The streets are buzzing, the upper class is living large, and tucked somewhere between all of this glitter is this woman called Sarah Elizabeth Howe. Now, Sarah looked like someone that you could instantly trust. She was soft-spoken, elegant, the kind of woman who knew exactly how to make people feel special, especially women. Now, Sarah said she was running something called the Ladies Deposit Company. It was supposed to be a private bank that was just for women, a place where they could finally keep their money safe from their greedy husbands and their judgmental men. It was every woman's dream. But here's the thing. There was no bank, there were no investors, and there was no hidden vault. What Sarah was running was one of the first ever Ponzi scams, okay? Decades before Charles Ponzi even showed up. And somehow she pulled it off so smoothly that the whole city didn't see it coming. So, who exactly was this lady called Sarah Howe, and how did she manage to fool some of the smartest women in Boston? Let's rewind a bit and go back to the very beginning. Sarah was born in 1826, probably in Providence, Rhode Island, but we are not exactly sure as records back then were completely messy. And well, Sarah wasn't about to tell people her original place of birth, so no one is exactly sure where Sarah was given birth to. But from a young age, Sarah had this gift. She could blend in anywhere. Sarah didn't come from a wealthy family, but she carried herself like she did. She had this poise and charisma that was just so infectious. The way she spoke, the way she dressed, everything about her just said, I belong. People said that Sarah was very clever, that she was charming, and she was way too smart for her own good. By her 20s, Sarah was already reinventing herself every few years. Sometimes as a widow, sometimes as a woman of means, and sometimes as a woman of complete mystery. But wherever Sarah went, she had this way of making people trust her. Anytime she opened her mouth, it was so easy for people to believe whatever was coming out of it. Now, with Sarah's gift of manipulation, it was so easy for her to get a lot of men to fall in love with her. And so Sarah's first marriage was recorded in 1860, and it was to a man called Florence Howe. Now, Florence wasn't a very wealthy man, but he was a respectable printer, or what most people would call publisher at the time. Now, Sarah's marriage to Florence really didn't last long because Sarah was very manipulative and conniving in the marriage. And some accounts will even go as far as saying that she tried to use him in some of her earlier schemes. Now, after the divorce to Florence, Sarah didn't want to let go of the name Mrs., so she continued not as Sarah but as Mrs. Howe. She stayed Mrs. Howe because it sounded more refined, and she wanted to be seen as a woman with history and a woman with class. Some reports even suggest that she might have married more than once, possibly to men in different states under slightly different names, and every time the pattern was eerily similar. She would charm her way into a man's life, live well with the man for a while, and then poof, she would be gone, and all of their money would be gone with her. But Sarah didn't just rely on men. She learned from them. Each marriage, each relationship taught her something. How people trusted too easily, how appearances could buy credibility, and how emotion could be turned into leverage. By her late 30s, Sarah had turned those lessons into a full-blown skill set. This woman could charm her way into anything. She wasn't just surviving, she was studying people, and soon she would find her perfect target, women just like her. After all of these so called marriages and reinventions, Sarah was basically a woman who had seen it all. She had charmed men, she had slipped through social circles, and she always landed on her feet. So her confidence and her pride and ego grew. But Sarah didn't just live on the money that she got from the men and all of her suitors. She also had these little side hustles, okay? She had small time scams, fake investments, and then she had this phony charity work where she would claim to help poor people and raise money to help the less privileged in the society, but all of the money would eventually go into her very own pocket. And in 1875, the law finally caught up with her, and Sarah was arrested in Boston for what the papers quietly called disorderly conduct. But what that disorderly conduct actually meant was that Sarah was arrested for fraud-related schemes. Now, for most people, this would be where they would call it quits. I got caught, okay, I'm done. But for Sarah, that was not the case. In fact, she was even happy that she got arrested, because what happened was it gave her a front row seat in knowing how the law worked and how easy it was to manipulate the law. And she also figured out how to easily disappear when she landed in hot waters. So when Sarah got out of the jail cell after a short period of time, she wasn't embarrassed. She wasn't ashamed that she had been arrested for fraud. In fact, she was emboldened. She decided that she was going to go out there and cook up bigger scams and be even more fraudulent. So when she got out, she disappeared for a bit, probably planning, watching, and learning. And a few years later, she came back to Boston completely rebranded. Gone was the petty schemer. In her place stood Mrs. Sarah E. Howe, the elegant, respected, and trustworthy Mrs. She started talking about a new idea, a ladies only bank, a safe haven where women could deposit their savings without judgment, without their husbands finding out, and without men controlling their money. She called it the Ladies Deposit Company. And on the surface, it sounded noble. It sounded like she was trying to liberate a lot of women when it came to their finances. But underneath that polished promise, Sarah was building something far more dangerous, a scam so smooth that it would fool an entire city. So here's the wild part. Sarah didn't launch this bank with a big announcement or anything dramatic. She started small. She started really, really quiet, almost too quiet. She would pull one woman aside at a time, usually older ladies or widows who were worried about their savings. She spoke softly, she was so polite, and then she would lean in and say something like, there's a private bank just for women, very exclusive. I can help you get in. That was a hook. Exclusivity, something that wasn't out there for just anyone. It was so private and so exclusive that you needed a referrer to get in. And here's how Sarah was paying all of these women, the classic Ponzi scheme. So what Sarah was doing was that she would get money from new investors or new women who were coming over to deposit their money, and then pay off the old ones on time as scheduled. And when she would do that and those women would get their interest, they would go around telling their friends, telling their family members about this prestigious club where you could make so much money. And those new women would now come over to the bank, invest and put in more money, and Sarah would just continue the cycle. So she was making a lot of money, but it was all going around in a circle, and she was basically just being fraudulent. Sarah never really looked greedy. She had hundreds of women lining up to give her everything from tiny savings to full inheritance, okay? Sarah never begged for deposits, she didn't advertise. She acted like this opportunity was exclusive. We only accept certain women, and that made people even want it more. And before long, Sarah was taking in thousands of dollars, which in the 1870s was like, running a mini microfinance bank. Like, I'm talking big money here. And for a while, everything looked perfect. Even though Sarah was looking like the Florence Nightingale of finance, every scam has a moment where the cracks starts to show. And with Sarah, those cracks appeared really slowly in tiny, almost invisible ways. Okay, so first, a few women noticed that nobody had actually seen these wealthy philanthropies that Sarah kept talking about. They were supposed to be this magical source behind all the money, but they didn't have names. There were no public appearances, nothing. And then others realized that the bank didn't really behave like a bank. First, there was no ledger you could inspect. There were no receipts that looked official. There were no written policies. Everything was just based on trust and Sarah's charming voice and endless promises. But trust can only stretch so far. So the real trouble started when a few women tried to withdraw more money than usual. Not the regular interest, but their full deposits. And that's when Sarah's smooth confidence started to sleep a little. Sarah would make excuses like, "Oh, the funds are tied up this week," or "Come back tomorrow, dear, the philanthropies haven't finalized the disbursement." At first, people believed her. After all, she always paid the interest on time. And then tomorrow turned into next week, and next week turned into Monday, and Monday turned into try again. And eventually, the whispers that once praised her started to sound very different. Women started saying things like, "Oh, have you actually met these wealthy ladies? Why is she delaying payments now? Why does the office look the same every time? There's no staff, there's no paperwork. I went in last Monday and I couldn't withdraw nothing." Even as all of these whispers were going on, women were still depositing. And then there was a situation where one woman loudly complained that she couldn't get her money back. Okay, I'm talking like she was yelling and screaming, "I need my money now." And Sarah only had excuses to give her. The whole room shifted. And that single moment, that one spark, was all it took. Suspicion started spreading, and soon people would start digging. Once the whispers of suspicion started floating around, it didn't take long for the newsmen to catch the scent. And in Boston, if there's one thing reporters loved more than politics, it was a scandal. And this was a scandal involving money. Enter the Boston Daily Advertiser, the paper that decided, yeah, something's off about this lady's deposit company and we're going to investigate. Now, these reporters were not subtle at all. They didn't send quiet letters or ask polite questions. No. They marched right into Sarah's little office, looked around, and immediately thought, wait, this is it? This is the big bank that's helping a lot of women? There was no vault, no staff, no records, just Sarah behind the desk, smiling like everything was perfectly normal. So the advertiser started interviewing her clients, and the stories did not match up. Some women said Sarah told them the philanthropists were from New York. Others swore that Sarah had told them they were from Europe. A few even said that they were spiritual ladies who didn't like their names used publicly. In other words, there were no philanthropists. And once the reporters sensed blood, they went all in. Within a few days, the Boston Daily Advertiser published a full expose basically saying, look, this lady's bank thing doesn't exist. The bank doesn't exist. This charity fund doesn't exist. And Mrs. Howe, well, she might be running a massive fraud. And once the article hit the city, it was like a brick going through a window. Women who trusted Sarah were angry. Others were embarrassed. A few refused to believe it, like they were in so much denial that their money had been taken by this fraudulent person. They showed up at the office and then they found Sarah acting off. She was so nervous, she was defensive. The line of investors that were waiting to deposit money was gone. Okay, everybody wanted their money out like yesterday. When the women came over to the bank demanding their money, Sarah tried to hold her ground. She kept her same soft, sweet, controlled persona. The funds are not available today. The benefactors are delayed. Come back tomorrow. Come back on Monday. But the thing about a scam is once people stop believing the story, it all collapses. And that's exactly what happened. Women crowded the hallway demanding answers. Some were crying, some were furious, some were literally pounding on the counter asking about their life savings. Girl, where is my money? Every woman who walked out of that bank was angry, and they told 10 more women, have you heard? Sarah's a scam. Try to get your money out. Have you gotten your money out? Every newspaper that picked up the story made it even louder. And as the pressure got worse, Sarah started cracking. Her calm voice was no longer there. Her explanations were getting sloppy, and the confidence that once made her untouchable was just gone. And eventually the city stepped in. Detectives, officers, even marshals. Once the authorities did the math was not mathing. And Sarah was arrested once again. But this time, it wasn't for disorderly conduct and it wasn't for small-time schemes. This was a full-on fraud. Thousands of dollars were missing, hundreds of victims, and a city that was ready to make an example out of her. Sarah walked into that courtroom looking polished, looking dignified, put together. If you didn't know the story, you would think she was the victim. Prosecutors laid it all out. The fake philanthropist, the juggling of the women's money and deposits, and Sarah didn't cry. She didn't budge. Instead, she argued. She claimed that this so-called philanthropist didn't want their name in public. This was too much publicity, and she was trying to protect their identities. She also claimed that she never juggled any money and that the reporters had misunderstood her intentions and that the whole investigation was botched. And every day, that courtroom was packed full with women who felt betrayed, women who were sad, women who just couldn't believe that they had been swindled by this crazy woman. After a long battle full of excuses, contradictions, and Sarah refusing to admit anything, she was found guilty of fraud. Sarah was sentenced to 3 years in prison, which for the 1800s was a pretty hefty punishment for a woman. And when the judgment came in, all Sarah did was straighten her dress, lift her chin, and she walked out of that courtroom like she had one more trick up her sleeve. And honestly, she did. You would think after serving another 3 years in prison, Sarah would be done. Okay, Sarah would have an epiphany and be like, listen, I'm not doing this, I'm done with scamming. But no. Immediately Sarah got out, Sarah did what only Sarah would do. She went over to New York and tried to play the same game on the women in New York. But here's the thing, at the time, newspapers were beginning to share stories and women were beginning to talk across state lines. So pretty soon, the newspapers caught up with Sarah and it was a little more harder to play the same scam on New York women. And so when people started connecting the dots and Sarah got exposed all over again, she vanished from mainstream public life. She drifted in and out of cities. There were like little scams here and there, but nothing as big as the Ladies Deposit Company. Now, Sarah's later life was a little more sad. She drifted in and out of cities, living in lodging houses, which are basically more like hostels now, because she didn't have where to live. But she had to move quite often because most times people would recognize her, so she always tried to stay a step ahead of anyone who might even recognize her. Sarah died in 1892 at around 66 years. No big scandal, no dramatic ending, just a quiet exit for a woman who once fooled an entire city, a woman who was once one of the most important women in Boston. But here's the thing that sticks with me with the story. Even though her final years were quiet, the impact of her scam wasn't. Sarah Howe became one of the earliest examples of the Ponzi style scheme, long before the term even existed, long before Charles Ponzi. Sarah was a woman who weaponized charm, empathy, and the power of feeling chosen. And she proved one thing that still applies even till today. The dangerous scams aren't loud, they're whispered softly by someone who seems like they're on your side. And this brings us to the end of this story. This is the monster under the bed.